We acknowledge that the delivery by our two experts who are economists, it's what we said and it is what it is. I come in the space of an industrialist playing the space of business and real economy. And therefore, how can this be of solution and rethinking the model to assist us conduct our businesses and make sure we survive in this space as expected. We did say, and once we were invited to this particular program, said the current pandemic and the ravaging war, it's recalibrating systems and economic and trade, resetting the world order, testing theories of globalization, supply chains disruptions, and using the new cliche, the new normal. How can these disruptions and recalibration aid our economic model? How agile are policies to weather the storms of monetary policy tools, concepts in the case of an IMF economy? So when I had opportunity looking at the document of the author, Doctor, it's obvious that he did a very extensive research and work capturing the genesis and the setting in which the IT framework should work best, as in a mature economy. And he also captured a number of points in there that makes it work as planned by the proponents. One of the points that drew my attention, I don't seek to bore you with all the number of points he captured: mature economy, that the financial system should be developed, IT enhanced transparency, and many others, fiscal discipline, and so on. A point that drew my attention that I'll seek to dwell on as I roll out is the flexible exchange rate regime. And he reiterated it and did a comparative analysis with Ayim. Proceeding beyond that, we sought to, not to bore you, focus directly on what is workable and what we propose to the Bank of Ghana and the government in general. So then he focused mainly on the inflationary trends, where he focused on the fiscal policy. And I believe he's extensively given us a number of propositions on the fiscal policy, and I will not seek to over-elaborate on that. That which drew our attention also is the food basket. Food basket's effect on the CPR, and that he did a very extensive research on, and did a reference to the Ghana Statistical Services data, and then highlighting those concerns. And then in that space, he sought to make a proposition of how to get a breed of macro-micro interventions to help resolve the matter. May I not over-elaborate on these points, but to say that we decided to pick on about 3 points that will give us further understanding how we can collaborate and assist the economy through the Bank of Ghana and Ministry of Finance and other related institutions to get these things resolved. So in our discussion, as we looked at the standards in the mature economy and the role of developing economies, and he contrasted and then focused finally on the areas that he believes are most important for intervention, we captured about 4 areas so that we proceed quickly. So I mentioned fiscal policy, which is extensively dealt with. And in the food basket, yes, the food basket is really crucial. And the data indicates about 43% of that hits our pockets in terms of inflationary issues. What can be done about the food basket? I guess those are the discussions that the governor and his team will seek to want to hear. We use the governor because we focus a lot on the monetary policy reports and its references to the GSS and other data that come in. So we, over the period when we meet the governor as industry, we engage because we are faced with these difficulties head on in our operations. So in the food basket, and we said, okay, so the GSS had flagged this concern, and it says, what do we do about it? Upon persistent advocacy, we realized that about 2-3 years ago, the governor, through his outfit, promoted what we call the question. And if you look in the value chain, and if you see what the doctor presented, he mentioned a number of interventions in the agri funds. And I recall when it was mentioned, I could see a number of reactions from the crowd. One district, one planting for food and jobs, fertilizer subsidy, one dam, one village, many of those interventions. And as you look in the value chain analysis of the intervention, today, all over the airwaves, we have a number of comments on the Minister of Agriculture, who says, look, I've been to the villages, I've been to the farms, there's a lot of food there. But on the markets and in the factories that should come in the one district, one factories, to add values for export and consumption, there are concerns. And when you go through a number of history and concerns, it has always been the subject matter of post-harvest losses. And in the value chain, from the post-harvest losses to the one district factory, mostly has concern. And you hear him say that, the agriculture will say, there are a lot of middlemen in there designing that space and making business out of it and inflating the prices. There's a lot of informality in that particular stage of the value chain. How do we make an intervention in that space to transform and create enough food in our warehouses, in our factories to add value? And I believe GESL, one of the interventions from the Bank of Ghana, it's really commendable. However, in our engagement with the Bank of Ghana, we expected GESL to be part of the agencies in the BOG. But we were told IMF says no, GESL cannot be part of BOG, and therefore GESL has become an institution. Granted that is so, and it falls within their operating manuals, socially, but how do we enhance GESL to intervene from the aggregation stage to one district, one factory, and then to the consumer in his home? Those are the engagements we have with BOG to propose solutions. All concerns here captured are well noted. How do we identify the space, the gap, and make a proposition? So we welcome GESL as a good initiative. Now we need to make sure GESL works to complement the role of the Ministry of Agriculture. Because the Ministry of Agriculture, through seedlings, through irrigation, through one district, one dam, and many interventions, gets to a stage and they get frustrated. I say this because in the past we all knew what we call the Ghana Food Distribution Corporation. The Ghana Food Distribution Corporation was playing an aggregating role, and then that from there moves to the factories and add value. How best can we transform that sector from an informal sector, where the middleman in Makola woman or the queen of tomatoes or queen of onions or of yam picks a product from wherever and then through all manner of machinations over prices? How do we design it? And we knew that of the commodity exchange was also tabled as one of the interventions. How do we allow commodity exchange play an effective role in pricing and guarantee some optical price for the farmer and for the businessman that fills that space, and then to the factory gate, so that they will do a lot of storage in the warehouses, and then we will buy, add value. Once we have identified that gap and consciously work between GESL and the Ministry of Agriculture, I believe that intervention can bring about a lot of transformation and drop the food basket. This is our proposition. Let us look at the value chain carefully and bring in significant innovation intervention. Let me not overlap that position. So we can go on, and another space that we identify is the fuel. And the presenter made mention of the role of top. But in our consideration, we were reflecting on the deregulated industry of the petroleum sector that leads to the BDCs and the OMCs. How effective has that role or that objective been attained, considering that in the mature economy, the various indicators that were taken are about perfect. Whilst in the developing economies, a number of data, a number of structures are not that perfect, and we are going through the deregulation concept. Is this subject to review? What can we, and there's a clear linkage between the deregulation policy and the flexible exchange rate regime that I captured in the mature economy that we are exercising in our inflation target framework. So therefore one will ask, how can we control these two areas? Because the inflation and the depreciation of the cedi has a relationship with the magnitude of fuels that are brought in and the effect in terms of the speculative nature of the exchange rates. So when we do not figure out how to handle these two, it becomes a concern. I stress on this and not going for taxes on fuels and not going for the toll and other interventions, but this is a cross-cutting concern. How do PFI, that's the participation financial institutions in the forex market, how do they play out? How do they set the exchange rate pricing that finally comes to the market for demand and supply to play in? And once that comes in, the failures of demand and supply are still an issue that comes back to the public. How do we handle that aspect? So for the fuels and the exchange rate flexibility concept or regime, one needs to interrogate it and throw it to the economists. That you need to look at that, because our biggest concern is it not possible that the exchange rate flexibility concept could have, bear in mind, we are not proposing a fixed exchange rate regime. We are of opinion that the PFIs and the forex bureaus and the gentlemen in the Okanshi area that sets the price for you and I on the exchange rate must be looked at. Is it possible to set up a cap in pricing of the exchange rate? Because you see, there are margins that they make on every dollar, there's a margin. Is it possible the central bank through the PFIs could determine in terms of rates so that the aggregate impact of a margin as against a fixed rate can be managed by capping in terms of rate? And I believe the experts will consider that. Because when you go into the literature looking at the disadvantages of the flexible exchange rate regime, if I read out a number to you, you realize that the country Ghana falls into each of them. Let me take about 2 or 3. One will say, under such flexible exchange rate conditions, flexible exchange rates create conditions of instability and uncertainty, which in turn tend to reduce the volume of international trade and foreign investment. Today, if you go to the port, the last time the port director general of port says bulk commodity had dropped about 30%. This is a clear example. I proceed to the next one. It says adverse effect on economic structure. The system of flexible exchange rates has serious repercussion on the economic structure of the economy. What is the economic structure of the economy? Where primary products are all that we ship out, where value addition is challenged because of lack of interventions and cost of doing business by virtue of the physicals that he described, the gap in there, and the cyclical effect that it has on the economy. Pretty complex. Then we proceed to see another one that says depreciation effects on capital movements. Speculative capital movements caused by fluctuating exchange rates will lead to the problem of extremely high liquidity preferences. We also saw it when the rating agencies just made a pronunciation, and we saw the effect on capital movement way back sometime in the year, and effects on the inflation. So the flexible exchange rate regime has its own concerns, as much as it has its positive concerns, which I can seek to read for you. And that goes into the mature system or developed economies that works well for them. That has become the yardstick that we use. So this proponent and the author of this document says that it is his belief that a combination of macro-micro, I'll call it a mixed method approach. And in the mixed method approach in research, you will see the quantitative and the qualitative data being mixed and figuring out how best to get the best designed methodology to solve problems. This is what the proponent of this document seeks to put across. And we believe in the set concept because the IT, which is the innovation target model, is carefully and eloquently described to what extent it can support the economy. However, we need deliberate intervention in the CPI, and I've given the food basket and looking at the value chain as a concept. How we can target fuel, target the construction sector that always comes up. When you target the construction sector, the major input into construction is cement. And about 80% of that product through clinker is imported. So it has an imported inflation. And he also demonstrated the imported inflation bit of it. So there are a number of things. So how then can we tackle a cross-cutting issue?
Can you wrap up in 2 minutes?
All right, I'll finish up. That can streamline this, and therefore we are looking at the flexible exchange rate regime. How do we tackle it? Or rhetorically, do we introduce a fixed regime? I'm not suggesting so, and I don't expect the journalists to go report that. We are interrogating the document captured by our colleague, and we believe, broadly, we agree with him that there must be a mixed method, intervening in the CPIs to create a conducive homegrown solutions to help us solve our inflationary rate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Humphrey.